Blood trickled down Walter Freeman's temple as he stood between his wife and the officer's drawn weapons. His military training kicked in despite his 73 years. Then a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down." "That's my father you're pointing guns at." Before we dive into this powerful story of justice and courage, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that like button right now and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. What would you do if you saw your parents being threatened? Let's find out how one Marine's intervention changed an entire town. The morning had begun like any other Sunday for Walter and Eleanor Freeman. For 40 years, they had maintained their weekend tradition, church service followed by brunch at Lily's Diner, then a leisurely stroll through Westlake Park. Walter, 73, moved with the dignified gait of a man who had served his country in Vietnam before delivering mail through the neighborhoods of Oak Ridge for 35 years. His wife, Eleanor, 71, still carried herself with the gentle authority of the elementary school teacher who had educated 2 generations of local children. Their Sunday best, Walter in a pressed blue button-down shirt and slacks, Eleanor in a floral dress with a light cardigan, reflected their lifelong commitment to presenting themselves with dignity in a world that often denied them respect. As they walked the winding paths of Westlake Park, their conversation centered on their son Malik, a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, who would soon be home on leave after 18 months of deployment. "He said he'd be here tomorrow, but you know our boy always likes to plan for contingencies," Walter said, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "The guest room is all ready. I put those photographs from his last visit on the nightstand." The park stretched before them, manicured lawns and flowering trees, creating an idyllic scene against the backdrop of the affluent Westlake neighborhood. In recent years, the area had implemented what the city council called community safety protocols, increased patrols, neighborhood watch programs, and strict enforcement of minor ordinances. These measures had appeared shortly after property values had taken a slight dip when several minority families moved into the once exclusively white enclave. Walter and Eleanor had lived on the edges of this neighborhood for decades, tolerated but never truly welcomed. After completing a circuit of the park, they settled on a bench near the central fountain. Eleanor took out a small pill container, preparing to take her heart medication. Walter pointed toward a cluster of ducks on the nearby pond. "Remember how Malik used to chase those when he was little?" Before Eleanor could respond, a patrol car pulled up on the park access road. 2 officers emerged, one older with a crew cut and perpetual scowl, the other younger with an uncertain expression. They approached with hands resting on their equipment belts. "Afternoon, dear," said the older officer, whose nameplate read Randall. "We received a call about suspicious individuals in this area." Walter straightened his posture slightly, but kept his expression neutral. "Good afternoon, officers. My wife and I are just enjoying the park." Officer Randall looked them up and down. "We've had reports of people who don't belong in this park. Can I see some identification?" Eleanor reached for her purse, but her hand trembled slightly, causing her pill container to fall to the ground. When Walter instinctively leaned forward to retrieve it, Officer Randall immediately tensed. "Sir!" "Keep your hands where I can see them." Walter froze, recognizing the dangerous escalation in the officer's tone. "It's just my wife's heart medication, officer." By now, several parkgoers had stopped to watch the interaction. Some had phones out recording the confrontation. Others were making calls, some to 911 though, with different intentions than reporting the officer's behavior. The younger officer, Walsh, according to his nameplate, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing as his partner continued. "I don't care what it is. You need to show me some ID right now, or you're trespassing." Eleanor's voice was calm but firm. "We've lived in this community for 40 years, officer. This is a public park." Randall's expression hardened. "This park is for residents." Walter maintained his composure. "We are residents. Our home is on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from here." "Then you shouldn't have a problem providing identification, should you?" Randall demanded, his hand now resting on his holster. Walter slowly reached for his wallet, maintaining eye contact with the officer. "I'm going to take out my identification now." As he produced his driver's license, Walter added, "May I ask why we're being singled out? There are dozens of people in this park." This question visibly angered Randall. "Step over to the patrol car, sir, now." Eleanor's breathing had become labored, her face showing signs of distress. "Walter, my medicine." When Walter hesitated, looking between his wife and the officer, Randall grabbed his arm roughly. "I said now." Several onlookers gasped as Randall shoved the elderly man toward the patrol car. Walter stumbled but caught himself, his military training from decades earlier helping him maintain his balance. "My wife needs her medication, officer. She has a heart condition." But his words fell on deaf ears as Randall pushed him against the patrol car and began patting him down with unnecessary force. Eleanor rose shakily to her feet, clutching her chest. "Please, he's done nothing wrong." Walsh finally spoke through quietly. "Ma'am, please stay seated." As Randall began handcuffing Walter, neighbors they had known for years watched in silence, some with phones recording others with averted gazes, and a few with expressions suggesting they had been the ones to make the call. Walter's face pressed against the hot metal of the patrol car, his dignity assaulted more painfully than his body. Eleanor's pained expression and labored breathing went unaddressed as she watched her husband being handcuffed for nothing more than existing in a space where others had decided they didn't belong. Gunnery Sergeant Malik Freeman adjusted his rearview mirror as he drove his black Ford pickup along the interstate, country music playing softly from the speakers. At 38, his powerful frame carried the disciplined strength of his 15 years in the Marine Corps. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left their mark. A thin scar along his jawline, a certain watchfulness in his dark eyes, and an unwavering commitment to the principles that had guided his military career. His current position as a training officer at Camp Lejeune had allowed him to shape the next generation of Marines, instilling the same values of honor, courage, and commitment that his father had taught him long before he enlisted. Walter's Vietnam service had been Malik's first introduction to what it meant to serve one's country, even when that country didn't always serve you back. The plan had been to surprise his parents tomorrow, but Malik had finished processing his leave paperwork early and decided to head home a day ahead of schedule. He hadn't told them. Their Sunday routine was predictable enough that he knew they'd likely be at church, then brunch at Lily's, followed by their walk in the park. He'd planned to be waiting on their porch when they returned home, maybe fire up the old grill in the backyard for an impromptu family dinner. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, Mrs. Johnson, their longtime neighbor. Strange for her to call on a Sunday. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson," he answered, keeping his eyes on the road. The elderly woman's voice came through with unusual urgency. "Malik, thank the Lord I reached you. Are you near Oak Ridge? There's trouble at Westlake Park with your parents." Malik's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of trouble?" "Police have your father in handcuffs. Your mother looks like she's having one of her episodes. It's all over the neighborhood group chat. People are saying they were causing a disturbance, but you know that's nonsense." Malik's military training kicked in immediately, compartmentalizing emotion and focusing on action. "I'm about 20 minutes out. Have they called an ambulance for my mother?" "Police are there, but no ambulance yet." "Gloria Williams is at the park and says your mother is refusing to leave your father's side." As Malik accelerated, more calls came in. Reverend Baker from their church, former students of his mother's, even Walter's old Postal Service supervisor. Each offered fragments of information, painting a disturbing picture of racial profiling, escalating into a dangerous confrontation. Malik calculated his route, avoiding main streets that might be congested on a Sunday afternoon. His mind flashed with memories of other confrontations. His father being followed in stores, his mother being ignored at parent-teacher conferences, his own experiences with traffic stops that always seemed to involve backup units. They had taught him to be twice as good, twice as careful, twice as respectful. Lessons that had served him well in the military, but shouldn't have been necessary in civilian life. As he approached Westlake Park, Malek could see the gathering crowd before he even turned into the parking area. 2 police cruisers with flashing lights created a carnival atmosphere around what should have been a peaceful Sunday afternoon. He parked quickly but deliberately, taking a moment to center himself before exiting his vehicle. His training in conflict de-escalation would be essential now. Though in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain navy t-shirt that stretched across his muscular shoulders, and running shoes, Malek moved with the unmistakable bearing of military personnel. Purposeful, controlled alert to his surroundings. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, whispers of recognition spreading. He assessed the situation with a tactical eye, his father handcuffed and leaning against a patrol car, his mother sitting on the bench refusing attention from a park ranger while keeping her eyes fixed on Walter. 2 officers, one aggressive and postured for confrontation, the other showing signs of discomfort with the situation. Multiple witnesses with phones recording, which could be beneficial for accountability. Malek approached steadily, maintaining a non-threatening posture while projecting calm authority. "Officer Shit," he addressed Randall directly. "I'm Gunnery Sergeant Malek Freeman, United States Marine Corps. Those are my parents. May I ask what's happening here?" Randall barely glanced at him. "This doesn't concern you. Step back behind the line." There was no actual line, just an arbitrary boundary the officer had decided upon. Malek recognized the tactic, creating rules on the spot to assert dominance. "With respect, sir, my mother appears to be in medical distress. She has a heart condition." Randall's response came with a dismissive wave. "We've got it under control. Move along before you join him." The racial undertone was unmistakable. Malek maintained his composure, strategically positioning himself where both officers and bystanders could clearly see and hear him. He pulled out his phone and placed a call. "Thomas Malek Freeman, I'm at Westlake Park with a situation involving my parents and Oak Ridge PD. Yes, the DA's office jurisdiction. I'd appreciate your presence." He kept his voice measured, letting the officers hear that he was contacting the district attorney. Thomas Reed had been his friend since high school and now served as an assistant district attorney for the county. As he spoke, Eleanor's breathing became more labored. A paramedic approached but was waved away by Officer Randall. "Police situation. Not clear yet." Malek ended his call and addressed the younger Officer Walsh. "My mother needs her medication. It's in a container that fell near the bench. May I retrieve it for her?" Walsh hesitated, looking to his partner, who was now radioing for backup, claiming a potentially volatile situation. Meanwhile, Walter had spotted his son and tried to stand straighter despite the handcuffs. "Malek, take care of your mother first." When Walter shifted his weight, Randall roughly shoved him back against the car. "Stay still." The force of the push caused Walter to lose his balance. His head struck the edge of the patrol car door, opening a cut on his temple. Blood began trickling down the side of his face. Eleanor cried out, attempting to stand, but overcome with dizziness. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more phones recording the escalating situation. Malek stood at a crossroads, his military discipline urging strategic patience. His son's instinct demanding immediate protection of his family. The sight of his father's blood created a moment of clarity. His next actions would determine whether this situation ended with justice or tragedy. Blood continued trickling down Walter Freeman's temple as he maintained his dignity despite the handcuffs. Malek assessed the situation with the strategic calm that had kept his platoon alive through ambushes in Helmand Province. He stepped forward deliberately, positioning himself in the narrow space between his parents and the officers. His movements were precise, non-threatening, but uncompromising. "Officer Randall." Malek stated, reading the nameplate clearly. "My father is injured and bleeding. My mother is experiencing cardiac distress. I am respectfully requesting medical attention for both of them immediately." His voice carried the practiced command tone that had directed Marines through chaos. Clear, controlled, brooking no argument while avoiding direct confrontation. Randall's hand drifted toward his weapon. "Step back now. This is your final warning." The crowd had grown substantially, with parkgoers calling others to witness the scene. Phones recorded from every angle, and in the distance, local news vans were pulling into the parking lot. Malik maintained his position, raising his open hands to shoulder height. "I am Gunnery Sergeant Malik Freeman, United States Marine Corps Service, number 8723400956. I am unarmed and making no threatening movements. I am requesting a supervisor and medical attention for my parents." The formal military identification shifted the dynamic subtly. Several onlookers whispered about his service, and Officer Walsh's posture changed slightly, his military respect conditioning responding to Malik's authoritative tone. "Sir, I think we should call for medical assistance," Walsh suggested quietly to his partner. Randall's face flushed with anger. "Stay in your lane, rookie. I'm handling this." He turned back to Malik. "Your military status doesn't mean anything here. Back away, or I'll arrest you for interfering with police business." Malik didn't move. "I'm respectfully requesting your badge number and the name of your supervising officer. I'm also requesting that you activate your body camera if it isn't already recording." His eyes had noticed the subtle indicator light was off on Randall's camera, while Walsh's showed the red recording dot. Randall took a step forward, intentionally invading Malik's personal space. "You're about 2 seconds from joining your daddy in cuffs, soldier boy." "Marine," Malik corrected calmly. "And I believe District Attorney Reed has arrived." Thomas Reed, a tall black man in his late 30s, wearing casual weekend clothes but carrying himself with unmistakable legal authority, approached from the parking lot. Randall immediately attempted to intercept him. "This is a police matter. The area is restricted." Reed showed his credentials. "Thomas Reed, District Attorney's Office. I have full jurisdictional authority here. Those barriers don't apply to me." He surveyed the scene quickly, his experienced eye noting the handcuffed elderly man, the blood, the distressed woman, and the gathering media. "Why hasn't medical been allowed to treat these citizens?" Randall bristled. "They were resisting identification and became confrontational." Reed raised an eyebrow. "I see an injured elderly man in handcuffs and a woman in medical distress. Officer Walsh, please have EMS approach immediately." The younger officer complied without waiting for his partner's approval, waving the paramedics forward. Eleanor had stabilized somewhat, but remained pale and shaken. Walter's temple continued bleeding, the crimson trail now staining the collar of his Sunday shirt. Malik stood his ground, a human barrier, ensuring the medical personnel could reach his parents. "You're making a serious mistake," Randall hissed at Reed. "These people were creating a disturbance." "I see approximately 50 witnesses with video evidence," Reed replied calmly. "We'll determine what happened soon enough." He turned to Malik. "Your father needs medical attention. Do you consent for him to be treated while still in custody until we resolve this?" Malik nodded, then addressed the paramedics directly. "My father has no drug allergies. My mother takes metoprolol for her heart condition. The pill container should be near the bench where she was sitting." As the medical team attended to his parents, Malik's phone buzzed with a message from Chief Harrison. "Aware of situation, en route, maintain calm." Randall received a radio call simultaneously and stepped away to respond, his expression darkening. Walsh approached Malik cautiously. "Sir, I want you to know this wasn't how it was supposed to go down." Malik said nothing, keeping his attention on his parents while processing the officer's implicit admission that something had been supposed to go down in the first place. The paramedics confirmed Walter needed stitches for his head wound, but was otherwise stable. Eleanor's blood pressure had stabilized with her medication, though they recommended hospital observation. Randall returned with renewed aggression. "We're taking the suspect to the station for processing. The woman can go to the hospital if necessary. That suspect is my father, a Vietnam veteran and 35-year postal worker with no criminal record, Malik stated evenly. What exactly is he being charged with? Resisting arrest, failure to identify disorderly conduct. Randall rattled off. Resisting what initial arrest? By, Reed interjected. What was the original cause for demanding identification from these specific individuals in a public park? When Randall hesitated, Reed continued. I'd like to see the CAD report and dispatch records for the original call, please. The tension peaked when Randall attempted to pull Walter away from the paramedic who was cleaning his wound. He's coming with me now. Hospital can wait. Malik shifted his stance subtly, using his body positioning to block Randall's access to his father without making physical contact. The strategic placement, learned in close-quarters combat training, made it impossible for Randall to reach Walter without physically assaulting a Marine in front of dozens of cameras. My father needs medical attention for an injury sustained while in police custody, Malik stated firmly. Denying that care could constitute negligence and violation of duty of care standards. His eyes locked with Randall's, neither man backing down. What do you think about this confrontation? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe Malik is handling the situation correctly by standing his ground without escalating to violence. Hit that like button if you've ever had to maintain your composure in an unjust situation. And subscribe to see more stories of courage against discrimination. The real question now is, will Officer Randall back down, or will his pride push him to make an even more dangerous choice? As the community watches and records who will step forward to either fuel the fire or help bring justice to this situation. The standoff between Malik and Officer Randall continued as community members began arriving at Westlake Park in growing numbers. Mrs. Chen, who owned the local grocery store where Eleanor had shopped weekly, for decades pushed through the crowd with bottles of water. Mrs. Freeman needs to stay hydrated with her medication, she insisted, ignoring Randall's attempt to wave her away. Reverend Jackson from New Hope Baptist Church arrived with several congregation members, their Sunday worship clothes, making it clear they had come directly from service. Walter and Eleanor have been pillars of our community for 40 years, the Reverend announced loudly enough for the news cameras to pick up. Whatever is happening here is a grave injustice. Malik nodded gratefully at the supporters while maintaining his protective position. The crowd had transformed from random parkgoers to a deliberate gathering of Oak Ridge residents. Walter's former colleagues from the Postal Service arrived wearing their uniforms. They had been having their monthly retirement lunch nearby when word reached them. Social media was amplifying the incident exponentially. Live videos streamed from multiple angles showed Walter's bloodied face, Eleanor's distress, and Malik's disciplined stance against armed officers. Local news reporters conducted impromptu interviews with witnesses. The hashtag #FreemanFamily was trending across the region within an hour of the first uploads. In the Oak Ridge Municipal Building, Mayor Patricia Wilson was receiving increasingly urgent messages from her staff. She had initially planned to ignore what she considered a minor incident, but the growing media presence made that impossible. Tell Harrison to wrap this up quickly and quietly, she instructed her weekend aide. Offer them a ride home and an apology if necessary. Just get those cameras out of my park. But the situation had already grown beyond such simple resolution. The Freeman family's 4 decades in Oak Ridge had been marked by persistent discrimination disguised as community standards. When they had purchased their modest home in 1983, they had been the 3rd black family in the neighborhood. The real estate agent had warned them about adjustment periods, a euphemism for the broken windows, ignored invitations, and whispered comments that would follow. Walter had delivered mail throughout Oak Ridge's winding streets for years, including to homes where residents would wait until he left before retrieving their packages, unwilling to interact with him despite seeing him 6 days a week for decades. Eleanor had taught at Oak Ridge Elementary until her retirement, educating the children and later grandchildren of residents who would never acknowledge her at community events. Through it all, the Freemans had maintained their dignity, raising Malik to understand that their conduct would always be scrutinized more harshly than others. "Keep your head high and your record clean," Walter had told his son repeatedly. "The world may not be fair, but you can be excellent." That philosophy had guided Malik through the Marine Corps ranks, where his impeccable service record and leadership abilities had earned him respect that sometimes eluded him in civilian settings. Now, decades of quiet dignity were transforming into a moment of public reckoning. Police Captain Richard Harrison arrived at the scene, immediately recognizing Walter from a community policing initiative meetings. Harrison, a 27-year department veteran nearing retirement, found himself caught between institutional loyalty and the clear injustice unfolding before him. "Walter, he acknowledged with a nod as he approached. "Looks like we have a situation here." "Richard," Walter replied with remarkable composure despite his injury. "Not how I plan to spend my Sunday." Harrison turned to Randall. "Status report, officer." Randall straightened his posture. Subjects were reported as suspicious persons in the park. They became confrontational when asked for identification. The male subject was detained for officer safety after making threatening movements. The blatant mischaracterization caused murmurs of protest from witnesses. Harrison looked skeptical. "And the injury?" "He resisted and struck his head during the lawful detention," Randall claimed. D.A. Reed stepped forward. "Captain, I've collected contact information from 17 witnesses whose accounts contradict Officer Randall's version. I've also noted that his body camera appears to be deactivated while Officer Walsh's remains on." Harrison's expression tightened as he realized the severity of the situation. This was no longer a routine incident to be handled with the usual procedures. The gathering crowd, the media presence, and the clear racial dynamics had transformed it into a potential watershed moment for Oak Ridge. Mayor Wilson arrived her casual weekend attire, hastily supplemented with the official mayoral blazer she kept in her car for emergencies. She headed straight for the news cameras with a practiced, concerned expression. "The city of Oak Ridge takes any allegations of improper police conduct very seriously," she began. "I've come personally to ensure this matter is handled with complete transparency." The crowd's reaction made it clear her platitudes weren't being well received. "Where were you when they vandalized the Freeman's mailbox last year?" someone called out. "Or when Walter had to fight to get his property tax assessment corrected?" added another voice. The mayor faltered, unused to direct questioning from constituents. Meanwhile, an anonymous source within the department had leaked Officer Randall's personnel file to several media outlets. Breaking news alerts on phones throughout the crowd revealed multiple prior complaints of racial profiling against Randall, all marked as unsubstantiated after minimal investigation. The documentation showed a pattern of aggressive enforcement in neighborhoods with increasing minority populations, with supervisory notes praising his proactive community standards enforcement. As this information spread, the dynamics shifted further. Residents who had been silent observers of discrimination for years began speaking out. "They did the same thing to my son last month," said Mr. Washington, who owned the local barber shop. "Stopped him for looking suspicious while he was jogging." Others shared similar stories, creating a spontaneous public testimony of patterns long ignored by officials. Captain Harrison made a decision that would later be described as the turning point. "Officer Randall, release Mr. Freeman from custody immediately. Officer Walsh, ensure he receives proper medical attention." When Randall began to protest, Harrison cut him off. "That's an order, not a suggestion. Then report to my office for administrative leave processing." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Not celebration, but a collective exhalation of tension. As the handcuffs were removed from Walter's wrists, revealing angry red marks on his elderly skin, Eleanor finally allowed herself to be moved to an ambulance for proper care. Malik maintained his protective stance until his father was safely away from Randall. The imagery was powerful. An injured elderly man finally freed from unjust restraints, a dedicated son standing guard, and a community awakened to injustice they had previously tolerated through silence. As the ambulance prepared to transport Walter and Eleanor to Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, the mayor attempted to approach for a photo opportunity. Malik politely but firmly intervened. "My parents need medical attention, Mayor Wilson. Perhaps we can discuss community policing reforms after they've been treated." The dismissal was public and unmistakable. Wilson retreated, aware that her political position had suddenly become precarious. The story was no longer just about one incident, but about decades of systemic discrimination in a community that prided itself on being exclusive and traditional. News helicopters circled overhead as Malik accompanied his parents to the hospital. The public park had become the staging ground for a long overdue conversation about race in Oak Ridge, with residents from all backgrounds remaining to share experiences and perspectives that had previously been relegated to private conversations. The Sunday afternoon that had begun with a peaceful walk had catalyzed a community reckoning that would ultimately reshape Oak Ridge's future. At Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, Walter received 8 stitches for the laceration on his temple, while Eleanor underwent a series of cardiac tests to ensure her condition had stabilized. Malik divided his attention between his parents' care and coordinating with D.A. Reed, who had accompanied them to continue gathering evidence. In the hospital corridor, Captain Harrison approached with an expression of professional concern barely masking personal discomfort. "Your parents shouldn't have experienced this," he acknowledged, keeping his voice low. "I want you to know we're taking it seriously." Malik's response was measured. "With respect, Captain, this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern my parents and others have endured for years." Reed joined them, tablet in hand, displaying police dispatch records. The original call came from a member of the Westlake Neighborhood Association reporting individuals who don't belong in the park. No criminal activity was alleged, just their presence. Harrison winced visibly. "You have to understand the pressures we're under from certain neighborhoods. The wealthy areas demand what they call quality of life enforcement, meaning removal of people they don't want to see," Reed translated flatly. Harrison didn't deny it. "We call it different things: community standards, maintaining neighborhood character, proactive policing in transitional areas. But yes, certain residents make repeated calls about suspicious individuals who are almost always minorities." The admission hung in the air between them. "Officers with complaint histories like Randall are deliberately assigned to patrol neighborhoods like Westlake," Harrison continued. "It keeps the wealthy residents happy to see visible enforcement. Most of the time, it's just intimidation, stopping people asking for ID, making them feel unwelcome. What happened today was Randall taking it too far." Then Malik's military training had taught him to identify systemic failures rather than just individual mistakes. So the department knowingly deploys officers with bias issues to perform racially targeted intimidation, then acts surprised when it escalates to violence. Harrison had no response. Meanwhile, across town at City Hall, Mayor Wilson had convened an emergency meeting with police leadership and city council members. The ornate conference room, usually reserved for budget discussions and ceremonial gatherings, now hosted a tense damage control session. "This needs to go away quickly," Wilson insisted, pacing the length of the polished table. "The optics are terrible. An elderly couple in the park, a Marine son. We're getting killed on social media." Police Chief Robert Davis, who had avoided appearing at the scene, adjusted his tie uncomfortably. "We've placed Randall on administrative leave pending investigation. Standard procedure." Councilman Gerald Thompson, representative for Westlake and the city's wealthiest districts, leaned forward. "What about a settlement offer them something reasonable with the standard confidentiality clauses? $20,000 should do it." "With hospital bills and a head injury," Councilwoman Martinez objected. "That's insulting," Thompson waved dismissively. "Fine, $50,000 then, but with strict non-disclosure. The last thing we need is them going on some media tour talking about racism in Oak Ridge. Mayor Wilson nodded. I'll approach them personally once they're discharged. I can emphasize how this incident doesn't represent our community values. The discussion continued, focused entirely on managing public perception rather than addressing the underlying issues that had created the incident. No one mentioned policy changes, departmental oversight, or community reconciliation. At the hospital, Walter refused the private room offered once staff realized the growing media attention surrounding the case. "Put me wherever you would normally," he insisted. "I don't want special treatment now when we've been fighting for equal treatment for years." In the shared room with Eleanor seated beside his bed, they revealed to Malik a history of harassment they had deliberately kept from him. "We didn't want you worrying while you were deployed," Eleanor explained, her hand trembling slightly as she recounted incidents. "The police stopped Walter 14 times last year just driving to and from church or the grocery store." Walter described how packages were repeatedly stolen from their porch, how code enforcement cited their property for violations while ignoring identical issues at neighboring homes, how police responded slowly to their calls but immediately to complaints about them. "We didn't tell you because you needed to focus on keeping yourself and your Marines safe," Walter said, "not distracted by problems you couldn't solve from Afghanistan." Malik struggled to maintain his composure, the strategic calm that served him in combat, nearly breaking under the weight of learning how his parents had suffered in silence. Outside in the corridor, Officer Walsh had arrived, still in uniform, but without his partner. He approached Malik cautiously when he stepped out of the room. "Sergeant Freeman, could I speak with you privately?" They moved to a quiet waiting area, Walsh visibly nervous. "What happened today was wrong, but it wasn't random," he began. "There's a pattern I've witnessed since joining the force 8 months ago. Certain addresses and names in the dispatch system are flagged for special attention." Meaning when we get calls from those addresses or about those locations, response is prioritized and aggressive enforcement is expected. Walsh pulled out his personal phone, showing Malik screenshots of a neighborhood watch message board. "The Westlake Homeowners Association has a private group. They regularly post about suspicious individuals with descriptions that amount to black person in nice neighborhood." The screenshots showed coded but unmistakable racist discussions. "Keep an eye out for individuals who might affect property values. Saw someone who doesn't look like they belong near the playground. Unknown vehicle with urban-looking youth parked on Lakeview Drive." Each post included instructions to call the special enforcement number, not regular dispatch. Walsh continued, "That number goes directly to officers like Randall, who handle what they call community safety concerns with no dispatch record. Today, they messed up and called regular dispatch, which created an official record." Malik studied the evidence, recognizing the systematic nature of the discrimination. "Why are you showing me this?" Walsh looked down. "Because I became a police officer to protect people, not to harass them. What happened to your parents today? That's not what I signed up for." As Malik processed this information, D.A. Reed returned with additional findings. His investigation had uncovered a shadow operation within the Oak Ridge Police Department where certain officers were essentially working as private security for wealthy neighborhoods, using public resources and authority to enforce unwritten community standards that amounted to racial exclusion. "The mayor sits on the board of something called the Oak Ridge Heritage Association," Reed explained. "They position themselves as a historical preservation group, but their minutes show discussions of maintaining the area's exclusive character and traditional demographic balance." The pieces were falling into place. Not just a single incident of racial profiling, but an organized system designed to maintain segregation through intimidation and selective enforcement. The superficially progressive Oak Ridge, with its pride in property values and school rankings, had constructed an elaborate mechanism for keeping certain residents in their place while maintaining plausible deniability. As evening fell, the hospital became an impromptu command center for what was evolving from an individual case into a challenge to Oak Ridge's entire power structure. Malik's military strategic training, Reed's legal expertise, and the unexpected alliance with Officer Walsh created a formidable team against entrenched systems of discrimination. What had begun as a peaceful Sunday walk had exposed decades of institutional racism, forcing a community to confront the contradiction between its professed values and its actual practices. In the days following the park incident, Malik took emergency extension of his leave and established a temporary headquarters in his parents' guest room. The walls were covered with documents, screenshots, and connection maps as he and D.A. Reed meticulously built their case against not just individual officers, but the entire system of discrimination in Oak Ridge. Their investigation revealed that the Oak Ridge Heritage Association functioned as far more than a historical preservation society. The organization, comprised primarily of wealthy white residents from the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, operated a shadow committee specifically tasked with maintaining what internal documents called the area's exclusive character. "Look at this," Malik said, highlighting an email exchange between association board members. They explicitly discuss establishing soft boundaries around certain neighborhoods and facilities. Reed nodded grimly. And here they coordinate with specific officers about presence patrols to discourage non-resident usage of parks and community amenities. The evidence-mounted Officer Randall had received tangible benefits for his role in this system, including a substantially discounted rental property owned by an association board member and lucrative private security contracts for events in the wealthy neighborhoods. Financial records showed he earned nearly double his police salary through these arrangements, creating a clear conflict of interest in his enforcement actions. More disturbing were the patterns they uncovered in police response and complaint handling. Reports from minority residents about harassment or discrimination were systematically buried through procedural maneuvers, classified as information only, assigned to perpetually backlogged investigators, or closed with minimal investigation as unsubstantiated. Captain Harrison, upon reviewing the evidence Malik and Reed had assembled, faced a personal and professional crisis. He had spent decades telling himself he was simply keeping the peace and responding to community concerns, when in reality he had been enforcing an unofficial system of segregation. "I knew certain neighborhoods got more patrols," he admitted in a private meeting with Malik and Reed. "I knew which officers were preferred by which communities. I just never connected it explicitly to race in my mind, though the pattern was obvious if I had bothered to see it." Harrison's awakening to his own complicity led him to provide crucial internal communications. Emails, text messages, and departmental memos that showed how dispatch calls were coded to enable racial profiling without explicit language that could create liability. PSC, Park Standards Compliance, CCI, Community Character Issue, and Non-Resident Activity were all department shorthand for responding to the presence of minorities in predominantly white spaces. At Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, Walter and Eleanor had been moved to a private room despite Walter's initial objections. Hospital administration cited media concerns, but the real reason became clear when their room began filling with visitors. Their hospital stay had transformed into an impromptu community gathering as dozens of Oak Ridge residents came forward with similar experiences of harassment and discrimination. "They stopped my son 3 times in 1 week for driving through Lakeview Estates," shared Mrs. Washington, whose family had lived in Oak Ridge for 2 generations. "Each time they asked whose car he was driving, like a black teenager couldn't possibly own a decent vehicle." Mr. Chen, whose family owned the local grocery, described how code enforcement would appear within hours if he left a delivery box outside his store, while white-owned businesses routinely violated the same ordinances without consequence. Each story reinforced the pattern, a system designed to make certain residents feel perpetually unwelcome through constant low-level harassment and selective enforcement. Meanwhile, news media had uncovered Officer Randall's membership in a private police fellowship organization called the Blue Heritage Society, which investigation revealed had connections to white nationalist groups. The organization's materials spoke of protecting traditional communities and maintaining neighborhood integrity, the same coded language used by the Heritage Association. Officer Walsh, despite increasing pressure and ostracism within the department, continued providing evidence. His decision had not come without cost. His locker had been vandalized. He was being assigned to the least desirable shifts, and anonymous threats had been left on his vehicle. Yet he persisted, driven by the realization that remaining silent made him complicit. "They're calling me a traitor," he told Malik during one evidence exchange. But the real betrayal was enforcing discriminatory practices while wearing a badge that's supposed to represent equal justice. The most damning revelation came when Reed's investigation uncovered Mayor Wilson's direct involvement. Not only did she sit on the Heritage Association board, but emails showed she had personally directed police resources to enforce the unofficial community standards. In one particularly explicit exchange, she had instructed the police chief to ensure appropriate demographic balance at the annual Founders' Day celebration by having officers check IDs at park entrances, a practice that had resulted in minorities being questioned and discouraged from attending while white attendees walked in freely. As Malik reviewed this evidence in his parents' home, surrounded by the family photos and modest furnishings that represented decades of their hard work and dignity, the full scope of the injustice crystallized. This wasn't just about one incident or one officer. It was about a community that had constructed elaborate systems to maintain segregation while presenting a facade of progressivism and inclusion. They created a separate and unequal system of enforcement, he explained to Walter and Eleanor after their return from the hospital. Different rules applied depending on who you were, all without ever explicitly mentioning race. It was designed to be deniable but unmistakable to those experiencing it. Walter nodded slowly, the stitches on his temple a physical reminder of how these soft boundaries could quickly become violent when challenged. "We always knew," he said quietly. "We just didn't have proof." Eleanor, still weakened from her cardiac episode, but resolute, added, "And without proof, speaking up just made you difficult or playing the race card." The growing evidence file represented something profound: validation of experiences long dismissed and accountability for systems long protected. As the investigation expanded, more city employees came forward with information, each revelation adding to the picture of systematic discrimination. Building inspectors admitted to applying stricter standards to minority-owned businesses. Parks Department staff revealed unwritten policies about monitoring and reporting non-resident usage. And even school administrators disclosed how certain parents' complaints received priority response, while others were routinely ignored. The Oak Ridge Heritage Association attempted damage control, releasing a statement claiming their activities were solely focused on historical preservation and community improvement. But their internal documents told a different story, revealing a coordinated effort to maintain racial exclusivity through harassment, selective enforcement, and institutional pressure. Have you ever witnessed discrimination hidden behind coded language like community standards or neighborhood character? Type number 1 in the comments if you've seen how systems can be designed to appear neutral while having discriminatory effects. Like this video if you believe transparency is the first step toward justice, and subscribe to see more stories of courage against institutional oppression. The question remains now that the Freemans and their allies have uncovered the truth about Oak Ridge's shadow system of discrimination. Will those in power be held accountable, or will they find new ways to maintain the status quo while escaping responsibility? The morning sun illuminated handmade signs and determined faces as protesters gathered outside Oak Ridge Police Department headquarters. Justice for the Freemans and end biased policing. placards bobbed above the crowd of several hundred. Across the street, a smaller but vocal group of counter-protesters had assembled, many wearing blue ribbons and carrying "Support Our Police" signs. The physical division mirrored the ideological fracturing occurring throughout Oak Ridge as residents grappled with revelations about their community's power structures. Inside City Hall, the weekly council meeting had transformed from its usual sparsely attended administrative session into a standing-room-only public forum. Walter Freeman, still bearing the visible stitches on his temple, approached the podium with the dignified bearing that had carried him through decades of military service, civil service, and persistent discrimination. "I've lived in Oak Ridge for 40 years, he began, his voice steady, despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I delivered mail to many of your homes. I coached Little League. I served on the Community Relations Board. And every day of those 40 years, I've had to prove I belong in spaces others take for granted." The chamber fell silent as Walter described specific incidents, being followed by security in local shops, receiving hostile questions when using the community pool, finding his carefully maintained lawn cited for violations while identical neighboring properties were ignored. "I didn't speak publicly about these experiences before because the burden of proof was always placed on me. Without evidence, I was just a complainer playing the race card. But now we have the evidence, and it shows exactly what we've always known. There are different rules depending on who you are in Oak Ridge." When Walter finished, the applause was substantial, but not universal. Some council members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Mayor Wilson maintained a carefully neutral expression, her political instincts warring with her recently exposed involvement in discriminatory practices. Eleanor approached the podium next her physical frailty following her medical episode, contrasting with her unwavering moral strength. "I taught at Oak Ridge Elementary for 32 years, she began. "I educated your children and your grandchildren." She looked directly at several audience members who had been vocally supportive of the police. "Mrs. Thompson, I taught both your daughters and your grandson Michael. Mr. Pearson, you thanked me with tears in your eyes when your son finally learned to read under my guidance." The personal connections landed with visible impact. Eleanor continued, "I devoted my life to this community's children, believing education could overcome prejudice. Yet I've watched parents who praised my teaching cross the street to avoid greeting me at the grocery store. I've been ignored at school functions by the same families who requested me as their children's teacher." Her voice never raised, but her quiet dignity carried her words throughout the chamber. The most painful part isn't the obvious hostility. It's watching people I've known for decades pretend not to see the discrimination happening right in front of them. The cognitive dissonance her words created was palpable, particularly for those who had benefited from her teaching while supporting systems that marginalized her. When the Freemans finished their testimonies, the clear moral authority they carried transformed the atmosphere. Even those who had come to defend the status quo found their certainty shaken by the concrete examples of injustice experienced by people they knew personally rather than abstract concepts of systemic racism. Outside City Hall, Malik organized a different kind of demonstration. Drawing on his military leadership training, he had established a civilian oversight initiative that documented police interactions throughout Oak Ridge. Volunteers with clearly marked observer vests and recording devices monitored police activity, creating accountability through visibility. Most powerful was Malik's recruitment of local veterans from all backgrounds. The image of former service members from different racial backgrounds standing together in silent witness at police traffic stops created powerful symbolism that was difficult for the law and order contingent to dismiss. "We served together to protect American values," explained James Sullivan, a white Vietnam veteran who had served in the same unit as Walter decades earlier. "Equal protection under the law isn't just a nice idea, it's what we fought for." Mayor Wilson attempted to regain control of the narrative at a hastily organized press conference. What happened to the Freeman family was unfortunate, but it represents a misunderstanding rather than any pattern of discrimination in our community, she stated to a skeptical press corps. Oak Ridge has always prided itself on being welcoming to all. The prepared statement collapsed when a reporter asked directly about her position on the Heritage Association board and her emails regarding demographic balance at community events. "Those comments have been taken out of context," she stammered, visibly flustered. "The association is concerned with historical preservation, not exclusion." Then why did internal documents specifically discuss maintaining traditional character through selective enforcement? The reporter pressed, holding up printed copies of the emails. The press conference ended abruptly with the mayor's aide citing time constraints as they hustled her away from further questions. Police leadership proposed what they considered a reasonable compromise. Officer Randall would be suspended with pay during an internal investigation. The community's reaction was immediate and negative, recognizing the familiar pattern where officers were temporarily removed from duty only to be quietly reinstated once public attention moved elsewhere. "Administrative leave isn't accountability," DA Reed stated publicly. "It's a paid vacation while waiting for the story to die down." Within the police department, Officer Walsh faced escalating retaliation for his role in exposing departmental practices. His locker was vandalized repeatedly. He was assigned to the most dangerous areas with inexperienced partners. Anonymous calls to dispatch sent him to false emergencies in isolated locations. His family received threatening notes suggesting they check their car brakes and be careful at night. Despite these intimidation tactics, Walsh continued documenting departmental abuses and connecting other officers uncomfortable with discriminatory practices to Reed's investigation. The battle lines in Oak Ridge had been clearly drawn not just between protesters and police, but between competing visions of community. Those fighting to preserve the status quo, coded discrimination masked by property values and quality of life concerns, found their position increasingly difficult to defend as concrete evidence mounted. Those pushing for a systemic change gained momentum as more residents recognized patterns they had previously ignored. The Freeman's home became a symbolic center of the community transformation. One morning, they awoke to find racist graffiti spray-painted across their garage door, crude slurs and threats that represented the desperate backlash of those seeing their privileged position threatened. But by afternoon, dozens of neighbors had arrived with paintbrushes and determination. Among them were faces the Freemans recognized from both sides of the protest lines, including some who had initially defended the police actions. "This isn't what Oak Ridge stands for," stated Mrs. Thompson, who had previously been vocal about outside agitators causing trouble. Her presence, paint roller in hand, represented the slow but significant shift occurring in community consciousness. As darkness fell and the newly painted garage door dried, the gathered neighbors lingered on the Freeman's lawn. Conversations that had never happened in 40 years of proximity began tentatively. Acknowledgments of observed discrimination left unaddressed questions about experiences long ignored and commitments to create different patterns moving forward. The vandalism intended to intimidate and isolate had instead catalyzed greater unity and awakening. Walter and Eleanor stood on their porch watching this impromptu community gathering with complex emotions. Cautious hope, tempered by decades of disappointment, appreciation for newfound allies, mixed with the pain of why it had taken violence to motivate their concern. Malik observed the scene with the strategic assessment that had served him through military planning. Recognizing that they had reached a crucial tipping point where momentum had shifted in their favor, but also understanding that the most dangerous period in any conflict is when established power begins to feel truly threatened. The battle for Oak Ridge's soul had entered its most critical phase. The Freeman case captured national attention as media outlets beyond Oak Ridge recognized its significance as a microcosm of broader societal struggles. Civil rights organizations dispatched representatives to support the growing movement. Department of Justice officials arrived to investigate potential pattern or practice violations in the police department. What had begun as a single incident of harassment in a park had expanded into a comprehensive examination of institutional discrimination throughout Oak Ridge. Officer Randall, suspended but unbowed, embarked on a media offensive portraying himself as the victim of anti-police sentiment and political correctness. On conservative talk shows, he presented himself as an officer merely enforcing community standards who had been scapegoated for doing his job. "I've devoted my career to keeping Oak Ridge safe," he insisted during one particularly sympathetic interview. "Now I'm being vilified for maintaining the quality of life that residents demand." His supporters organized a Back the Blue rally that drew concerning participation from outside groups with explicit white nationalist ties. Men in tactical gear and militia insignia mingled with local police families, creating an intimidating presence that increased community tensions. Captain Harrison watched this dangerous polarization with growing alarm. Having spent weeks reviewing the evidence compiled by Malik and Reed, he could no longer deny the systematic discrimination he had participated in through action and inaction. "This isn't about individual officers anymore," he confided to Malik during a private meeting at the Freeman's home. "The entire departmental culture needs restructuring. I've been part of the problem, and I need to be part of the solution before someone gets seriously hurt." The captain's concerns proved prescient when Walter suffered a minor stroke, likely triggered by the accumulated stress. Though stabilized quickly with minimal lasting effects, the medical crisis further galvanized community support. The hospital waiting room filled with neighbors, church members, and former students, many openly acknowledging how the Freemans' mistreatment had continued with their silent complicity. During Walter's brief hospitalization, Malik discovered evidence that Officer Randall had previously harassed his parents on multiple occasions. Dispatch records showed Randall had conducted special attention patrols past the Freeman home over 20 times in the previous year, had issued Walter 3 traffic warnings for minor or non-existent violations, and had been the responding officer who dismissed their reports of mailbox vandalism as unsubstantiated. He specifically targeted them, Malik realized, sharing the evidence with Reed. This wasn't random enforcement. It was personal and deliberate. Mayor Wilson and select council members attempted a different approach to containing the growing controversy. They arranged a private meeting with the Freemans and their representatives, offering a substantial financial settlement, $300,000 with non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses that would prevent further discussion of discriminatory practices. "The city is prepared to acknowledge the unfortunate incident without admitting liability," the city attorney explained, sliding the paperwork across the conference table. "This generous offer would compensate your family for any distress while allowing the community to move forward." The Freeman's attorney, provided by a prominent civil rights organization, identified the transparent attempt to buy silence and prevent systemic reform. "My clients aren't interested in confidential settlements that allow discriminatory systems to continue," she stated firmly. "They're seeking accountability and structural changes, not personal enrichment." The rejection of the settlement offer intensified the administration's anxiety. Without the ability to resolve the situation quietly, with money, they faced the prospect of prolonged public scrutiny and potential federal intervention. Community polarization reached dangerous levels as protests and counter-protests grew in size and intensity. Confrontations between opposing groups resulted in shoving matches and verbal altercations that threatened to escalate to violence. Malik recognized the volatile dynamics from his conflict zone experience and organized a team of veterans and community leaders trained in de-escalation techniques. During a particularly tense standoff outside the police department, when angry words began transitioning to threatening movements, Malik and his team formed a human buffer between the groups. "We all want safe communities," Malik addressed both sides, his commanding presence temporarily cutting through the hostility. But safety built on treating some citizens as inherently suspicious isn't real safety. It's just protected privilege. His intervention prevented immediate violence, but the underlying tensions continued simmering. D.A. Reed presented the accumulated evidence to a grand jury seeking indictments for civil rights violations, abuse of power, and conspiracy against rights. The proceedings remained confidential, but leaks suggested the investigation had expanded beyond individual officers to include city officials who had directed discriminatory enforcement. The Heritage Association's records had been subpoenaed, revealing explicit discussions about using police resources to maintain neighborhood exclusivity through selective enforcement. Board minutes documented strategies for discouraging minority residents from using certain parks and facilities through constant ID checks and harassment disguised as safety measures. The association's lawyers fought the subpoenas vigorously, claiming confidentiality and relevance objections that delayed but ultimately couldn't prevent disclosure. Officer Walsh faced the most difficult decision of his career when summoned to testify before the grand jury. Despite escalating threats and intimidation, he appeared as scheduled, providing sworn testimony about departmental practices, specific instructions to target minority residents in premium neighborhoods, and the retribution faced by officers who questioned these tactics. "I became a police officer to uphold the law equally for everyone," he testified. "What I witnessed in Oak Ridge wasn't policing, it was enforcement of unofficial segregation." His testimony, combined with the documentary evidence and witness statements, presented a compelling case of coordinated civil rights violations spanning years. As the grand jury deliberations continued behind closed doors, Oak Ridge existed in a state of tense anticipation. The Freeman family, having catalyzed this moment of reckoning, continued their daily lives with dignity despite the swirling controversy. Walter recovered from his stroke with characteristic resilience, working with a speech therapist to address minor lingering effects while maintaining his role as a moral center for the growing movement. Eleanor returned to community education in a new capacity, conducting workshops on recognizing and addressing systemic discrimination. Mullick utilized his military leadership training to build coalitions between previously divided community groups, finding common ground in shared values of fairness and dignity. The breaking point had been reached. Oak Ridge could no longer pretend discrimination was merely perception or isolated incidents. The evidence had become too substantial, the patterns too clear, the testimony too compelling. Whether through grand jury indictments, Department of Justice intervention, or community transformation change, had become inevitable. The systems that had operated in shadows for decades had been exposed to light, and no amount of denial could return them to darkness. 6 months later, Westlake Park bustled with activity under the warm spring sunshine. Children of diverse backgrounds played together on the newly renovated playground equipment. Elderly couples strolled along paths now adorned with historical markers detailing Oak Ridge's complete history, including previously omitted chapters about segregation, integration, struggles, and civil rights milestones. At the park center, a community gathering celebrated the official renaming to Unity Park, with Walter and Eleanor Freeman as guests of honor. The transformation of the park symbolized the broader changes that had reshaped Oak Ridge following what locals now simply called the Reckoning. The grand jury had returned indictments against Officer Randall, 2 senior police officials, and 3 Heritage Association board members, including former Mayor Wilson, who had resigned in disgrace when her explicit directives for discriminatory enforcement became public. The evidence had been too overwhelming to deny, with emails, internal memos, and testimony documenting years of systematic civil rights violations disguised as community standards enforcement. Beyond the criminal proceedings, Oak Ridge had embraced comprehensive institutional reforms. Walter now chaired a community reconciliation committee that included some surprising members: former opponents who had recognized their complicity in unjust systems and committed to dismantling them. Thompson, who had once defended the police action against the Freemans, worked alongside Walter to develop new community policing guidelines. "I was wrong," she had stated publicly during the committee's first meeting. "I benefited from systems that hurt my neighbors, and I chose not to see it. That changes today." Eleanor had returned to education in an unexpected capacity, developing cultural competency programs adopted by local schools and the police academy. Her decades of experience navigating discrimination provided unique insights for training designed to recognize and address implicit bias. Her cardiac condition had stabilized with proper treatment, and doctors credited her renewed sense of purpose with her improved health. Officer Walsh, initially ostracized for breaking the blue wall of silence, had become an integral part of Oak Ridge's new community policing initiative. Rather than enforcement-focused patrols, the program emphasized relationship building and problem-solving partnerships between officers and residents. Walsh regularly visited schools, businesses, and community centers, transforming the perception of police presence from threatening to supportive. Captain Harrison, nearing retirement after 30 years of service, had made it his final mission to rebuild the department's culture from within. He publicly acknowledged his own past failures of leadership and established new accountability systems, including civilian oversight, body camera requirements, and transparent complaint investigation procedures. "I can't change what I allowed to happen," he stated during a community forum, "but I can ensure it never happens again on my watch." The consent decree resulting from the Department of Justice investigation mandated comprehensive reforms throughout Oak Ridge's institutions. The police department underwent complete retraining with emphasis on constitutional policing and cultural awareness. City services implemented equity audits to identify and address disparities in resource allocation and enforcement. Housing and public space policies were revised to promote integration rather than de facto segregation. The new mayor, Diana Chen, the first Asian American woman to hold the position, had campaigned explicitly on institutional reform and community healing. "Oak Ridge's strength lies in genuinely embracing all its residents," she declared at her inauguration, "not in preserving exclusive enclaves or selective enforcement." Her administration prioritized affordable housing initiatives, public transportation, connecting all neighborhoods, and community spaces designed for inclusive use. Malik, having completed his military service, accepted a position leading a regional police training program, focusing on de-escalation, constitutional policing, and community engagement. His unique combination of military leadership experience and personal understanding of discrimination provided credibility with officers while informing cultural change. Law enforcement agencies throughout the state now sent personnel to learn the Oak Ridge model of reform policing. The Freeman home, once vandalized with hateful messages, had transformed into a community gathering place. Their living room regularly hosted conversations between longtime residents and newcomers, creating space for difficult but necessary discussions about race privilege and belonging. Former opponents found themselves forming unexpected alliances in rebuilding a truly integrated community. On this particular Sunday, Walter and Eleanor resumed their traditional park walk, now joined by neighbors of all backgrounds. As they strolled along familiar paths with Malik beside them, Walter reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "We didn't set out to change Oak Ridge," he observed quietly. "We just wanted to enjoy our Sunday walk without being treated as criminals." "Sometimes justice starts with the smallest assertion of dignity," Malik replied. His military bearing now softened by civilian life, but still evident in his posture. Eleanor squeezed her husband's hand. "I never thought I'd see this much change in my lifetime." "There's still work to do, but today I feel like I truly belong in the community I've served for 40 years. As they completed their circuit of the park, they passed a new memorial garden dedicated to those who stood for justice when it was difficult. Community members greeted them with genuine warmth, rather than the polite distance of previous decades. Children who once would have been hurried away by nervous parents now waved enthusiastically, recognizing Mrs. Freeman from her school visits. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Pockets of resistance remained. Some changes were more symbolic than substantive, and occasional incidents reminded everyone that progress required constant vigilance. But the fundamental shift in Oak Ridge's power dynamics and community consciousness could not be reversed. What had begun with an elderly couple being harassed for sitting on a park bench had catalyzed a reckoning with decades of institutional discrimination. The Freeman's dignity in the face of injustice, Malik's strategic leadership, and the community's eventual awakening had created a template for genuine change that was being studied and replicated in cities across the country. As the community celebration continued around them, the image of Walter, Eleanor, and Malik walking together, their dignified stance against injustice having transformed not just their own lives, but an entire community's understanding of justice, courage, and belonging, represented both the progress achieved and the ongoing journey toward true equality. What do you think about the transformation of Oak Ridge? Has a single incident of injustice ever sparked larger changes in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you or made you think differently about systemic discrimination, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and justice. Remember, sometimes the most profound changes begin with one person standing firm in their dignity. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Freeman family's experience, and may we all find the courage to stand against injustice when we encounter it. Until next time, take care of each other and remember that true community includes everyone. The Freeman family's struggle against discrimination reveals powerful truths about systemic racism and the courage needed to confront it. First, even respectable communities often maintain hidden systems of exclusion through coded language and selective enforcement. Second, dignity in the face of injustice can be a revolutionary act. Walter and Eleanor's lifetime of quiet resilience provided the moral foundation for change. Third, strategic documentation and evidence gathering are essential for transforming individual experiences into systemic accountability. Fourth, true allies must move beyond sympathy to active participation in dismantling unjust systems. Fifth, institutional change requires both outside pressure and internal champions willing to acknowledge their complicity. Finally, reconciliation becomes possible only when communities honestly confront their history of discrimination. The most enduring lesson is that justice doesn't happen automatically. It requires ordinary people standing firm in their dignity, supported by those willing to witness and validate their reality. One family's Sunday walk became a catalyst for transformation because they refused to accept the normalization of injustice. Has discrimination ever hidden behind polite phrases like community standards or quality of life concerns? In your neighborhood, share your experiences in the comments below. If you believe everyone deserves dignity regardless of their race or background, hit that like button to support this message. Subscribe to join our community dedicated to sharing powerful stories of courage against injustice. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about standing up against racism with dignity and strength, please share this video with them. Thank you for bearing witness to the Freeman family's journey. May we all find the courage to stand for justice when faced with discrimination and the wisdom to build communities where everyone truly belongs.